All right, so you hear these words thrown around all the time, right? Inflation, the economy, rising prices. But what do those big headlines actually mean for, your wallet? Well, today we're going to decode one of the most important numbers out there, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Let's get right into it.
You've definitely felt this. I mean, we all have. You're at the grocery store, you're filling up your car, you're paying your bills, and it just feels like your money doesn't stretch as far as it did before. That's not just in your head, it's a real, measurable thing. And it all starts with this one simple question. So, to get a real handle on changing prices, economists can't just, guess. They need a solid, consistent way to measure how the cost of living is shifting for regular people. And that tool is what we call an index number. Okay, so here's the textbook definition. The words you really got to latch onto here are specific group and specific place. See, this isn't some generic one-size-fits-all number for an entire country. An index might be for, say, factory workers in Chicago, or maybe for retirees in Florida. That focus is exactly what gives it its power. The easiest way to wrap your head around this whole thing is to just picture a giant shopping cart. And this cart is filled with everything a typical family buys in a month. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is basically just the price tag on that exact same shopping cart, tracked month after month, year after year. Simple as that. So, how in the world do they decide what goes into this ultimate shopping cart? Well, it's not random at all. It's actually a pretty detailed four-step process that's designed to be as accurate as possible. Let's break down how it's done. First, you got to define the who and the where. Then, and this is so important, statisticians go out and survey real families to see what they're actually buying. Step 3, they go to the actual stores where those people shop to get the prices. And last, they pick a base period, some normal time in the past, without a major war or pandemic or something, and they set its value to a nice round 100. Every change from then on is measured against that starting point. And what do those family surveys find? Well, it turns out most of us spend our money in a few big buckets: food, housing, gas for the car, that kind of thing. And it's not just what we buy, but how much of our budget goes to each category. That breakdown is absolutely key to making sure the index reflects real life. Okay, time for a little math. But hey, don't worry, the idea behind it is really simple. There are two main ways to actually calculate the index number from all this data. And what's so cool is that even though the formulas look totally different, they're designed to give you the exact same answer. So the first method is called aggregate expenditure. It sounds way more complicated than it is. Just zoom in on those last two columns. The P0Q0 column, that was the total cost of our shopping cart back in the base year, which came out to 146.5. Now look at the P1Q0 column. That's the cost of the exact same stuff at today's prices, which is now 174. And here's the magic. You just divide the current cost, 174, by the original base cost, 146.5, and multiply by 100. And boom, you get 118.77. Since our starting point was 100, that number tells us that the cost of living for this group went up by 18.77%. All right, the second way to do it is the family budget method. This one looks at each item one by one. It calculates the price change for each thing individually, that's the P column. Then, and this is really clever, it gives each item a weight, which is that V for value, based on how much of the family's budget it takes up. So a jump in the price of rent is going to have a way bigger impact than a jump in the price of, popcorn. And check this out. When you do the math this way, dividing that big total in the last column by the total in the first column, what do you get? The exact same number, 118.77. Two totally different roads that lead to the exact same place. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, so we know what the index is, we know how it's made, but why should you care? Why go through all this trouble? This is where it all comes together. This is where the numbers jump off the page and have a real tangible effect on your life. This one little number has a huge ripple effect. It's how we figure out your real wages, not just the dollar amount on your paycheck, but what that money can actually buy. That's why it's a massive deal in wage negotiations and for companies figuring out cost of living raises. Governments use it to adjust things like Social Security payments. Central banks watch it like a hawk. Basically, the CPI is the official scorekeeper for your money's buying power. Now, you might also hear about something called the WTI, the Wholesale Price Index. So what's the difference? Well, think of it this way. The CPI uses retail prices. That's what you and I pay at the cash register. The WPI uses wholesale prices. That's what businesses pay each other for goods in bulk. Because of that, the CPI is a much more direct, right now, measure of how inflation is hitting your personal bottom line. Now, for all its power, the CPI isn't perfect. It's an incredibly useful tool, but it just can't be a flawless reflection of reality for every single person. It's an estimate, and like any estimate, it has its limits. The whole thing is built on samples and averages, right? And our spending habits change over time. What we blew our money on 10 years ago is probably different from today, so those weights we talked about can get a little stale. Plus, the index struggles with quality changes. Your new smartphone costs more, sure, but it's also a pocket supercomputer compared to your old one. So the CPI is a really, really good estimate, but it's still an estimate. And that right there brings us to the biggest takeaway of all. The CPI, it's tracking inflation for some theoretical average person. But let's be real, who is actually average? None of us are. We all have our own unique spending habits, our own personal shopping cart. So the next time you see that big CPI number in the news, don't just take it as gospel. The real question you should be asking is, what does inflation really mean for my wallet?